Oke, sambil nunggu di admit aja semua daripada pada kabur nanti.
Iya, ini udah
Jam
4
10.
menit.
Ya, terserah Mas.
Paling jauh aku ngomong ke Pak KLI anu Joni dia bahala maksudku anu kau ya memang aku merekomendasikan kau memang.
Halo Pak Eka. Halo Pak Eka. Selamat pagi Pak Eka. Belum respon, Bu.
Selamat pagi Pak Eka.
Selamat pagi Bu Fitri. Wah, maaf nih, saya malah di kampus internetnya agak trouble nih kayaknya, nggak lancar-lancar amat nih.
Ya nanti akan lancar Pak, sebentar lagi Pak.
Mudah-mudahan.
Suka down sebentar.
Selamat pagi Pak Eka.
Selamat pagi Bu Lili, sehat semua.
Alhamdulillah, sehat semua.
Semuanya, terima kasih.
Saya hadir ya
Pak.
Pak.
Aceh nih kayaknya muncul juga nih.
Dari Unsia sudah mewakili saya ya Pak.
Pagi
Prof Eka.
Pagi Prof Eka.
Fitri.
Apa kabar Prof? Sehat-sehat?
Baik, Alhamdulillah sehat. Kalau ingat Bu Fitri, ingat kita itu
mendaki Borobudur
ke Candi, iya. Mudah-mudahan bisa ketemu lagi ya.
Iya Bu.
Selamat pagi Bu Fitri.
Pagi, good morning Prof.
Sehat.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention please? The presentation is about to begin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. Welcome to all of you to Webmaster 3 with topic Towards Sustainable Beef Cattle Crossbreeding Program in Indonesia. This scientific meeting is conducted by the Master Program of Animal Science, Faculty of Agriculture, Universitas Sebelas Maret, supported by Ikatan Sarjana Pertanakan Indonesia, ISPI, and the media partner of Trobos, Livestock. Honorable guests and speakers from University of New England, Professor Heather Barrow, our invited speaker from Faculty of Animal Science, Gajah Mada University, Ibu Insinyur Tri Satya Mastuti Widi SPT MP MSc PhD IPM ASEAN A, Chairman of ISPI Indonesian Animal Science Undergraduate Associations, Bapak Insinyur Didik Purwanto IPU, Vice Dean of Faculty of Agriculture Universitas Sebelas Maret, Dr. Insinyur Eka Handayanta MP IPU, Head of Master Program, Department of Animal Science, Faculty of Agriculture, Universitas Sebelas Maret, Dr. Insinyur Adi Mahna Patriadi SPT MP IPM, and all guests who participate in this event. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Lili Kartikasari from Faculty of Agriculture, Universitas Sebelas Maret. I will be serving as your host in this program, and I am very pleased to see you all here. On behalf of the committee, we would like to say many thanks to all of you who have joined to participate in this meeting and to share knowledge together. Without your contribution, it is impossible for us to run this activity. We hope you will learn a lot today in relation to towards sustainable beef cattle crossbreeding program in Indonesia. Before our program begins, we would like to make some announcement. First, we ask the webinar participants to fill in their presence. The link to the presence form and materials will be given during the discussion session. Second, we ask the participants to please mute their speakers to ensure the smooth running of this webinar. Thank you. Next, to the participant who would like to ask question, please write the question in the chat room and mention your name and institution. The committee will address the question to the speaker. And at the end of the session, we will take picture for documentation. Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting contains 4 sessions. The first one is opening. The second session is remarks by the Vice Dean Faculty of Agriculture, Universitas Sebelas Maret. The third session is forward by the Chairman of ISPI. The next session is scientific presentation and discussion by Professor Heather Barrow and Dr. Trisatya Mastuti Widi. The last session is information and closing remarks. To start this meeting, we will begin with a prayer basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you. The next session is the Vice Dean's welcome that will be represented by Vice Dean for Academic Affairs. Here we are pleased to have Dr. Insinyur Eka Handayanta, MP IPU, to deliver the remarks. Please, Bapak Dr. Eka Handayanta, the time is yours.
Thank you, Bu Lili, for the time given to me. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
I am the Vice Dean of Academic Affairs, Fakultas of Agriculture, Universitas Sebelas Maret, Surakarta, Indonesia. And I am here on behalf of the Dean to welcome you to one of our online event. This webinar was the start of our Webmaster series. People who attend the first 2 events of the series are definitely the scientific content and the reputable as well as foreign experts that invite speakers in the webinar. Besides, the Master of Animal Science, Universitas Surakarta, is collaborating with the Indonesian Society of Animal Science in the webinar program. This survey was done as an act of function for the condition of local genetic resources, which are full of uncertainties. It is strange that this continuation of our contribution for the nation's livestock sector. I would like to thank to Mr. Dipanto, the chairman of ISPI, and Mr. Dr. as the secretary of ISPI for the in facilitating in this event. We are very fortunate today to have action speaker. I like to give the highest appreciation for Professor Heather Barrow from the University of England, Australia, and to Dr. from the Jakarta. I represent system is specialist in crossbreeding. We not have the participants whom are coming from all over the country. Some of the participants are abroad, such as from Philippines, Malaysia, and of course Australia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Bapak Dr. Eka Handayanta, for the wonderful remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, the following session is forwarded by the Chairman of ISPI, Ikatan Sarjana Peternakan Indonesia, Bapak Insinyur Didi Purwanto, IPU. Firstly, I would like to briefly read his curriculum vitae. Bapak Didi Purwanto was born in Malang in 1960. He finished his undergraduate study at Universitas Brawijaya and his profession education at Universitas Gadjah Mada. In terms of position and organization, he is the main director of Karunia Alam Sentosa Abadi Company, Chairman of the ISPI, and Chairman of Puspindo, Association of Indonesian Beef Cattle Entrepreneurs. To Bapak Didi Purwanto, please welcome.
Oke, thank you Bu Lili. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Webinar attendees, let me tell you my point. Talking about the beef cattle industry in Indonesia, domestic production has not been able to fulfill national consumption with a consumption of 2.52 kg per capita per year and a population that has around 267 million people. Domestic production is only able to fulfill 50%. We still need 42% from imported cattle or meat. There are fundamental problems that have yet to able resolve, even though there have been 7 changes to the president. Even from the data recorded from year to year, the domestic production capacity has decreased its ability to fulfill national consumption, even though in fact it's only 2.52 kg per capita per year, and it is still low compared to countries in the Southeast Asia. The fundamental problem is too low productivity of beef cattle to fulfill domestic consumption. One of the causes of the inability of the cattle breeding in the farmer to fulfill national requirement, among the others, is the breeding pattern of breeders who are still reluctant to change. Farmer raising cattle is only for saving, not for the industry. And cattle ownership at the farmer level is only around 2 or 3 head and has never been calculated regularly in the economic factor. This condition ultimately caused slow development of beef cattle among the farmer. Even though almost 90% of the cattle supplied to the slaughterhouse come from the farmer. Several problems have been initiated by government to encourage the acceleration of the increase in the beef cattle population by crossing breed cattle from abroad with local cattle in Indonesia. However, it is unfortunate that when deciding on the crossing program that is expected to improve the quality of the local cattle, it is not carried out with structured recording and also the evaluation, so that the negative impact began to emerge, such as genetic recessive began to appear. Even the random crossing occur due to the uncontrolled crossover pattern among farmer without the guidance of the geneticists. Another thing that happen is the difficulty in the finding local cattle or pure Indonesian cattle that have good adaptability to environmental condition in Indonesia. If this condition is allowed to occur, the next generation will only able to see local cattle that are pure through the picture because they have mutated. Therefore, I give my high appreciation for this webinar which raises the issue of the sustainable cattle crossing. I hope that through this webinar, we can share creative ideas about crossing beef cattle in accordance with Indonesian climate, Indonesian nature. The beef cattle industry in Indonesia must be sovereign in own country. Finally, I congratulate this discussion. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Bapak Didi Purwanto, for delivering the great forward. Turning now to the following sessions, which are presentation and discussion. We are very pleased and honored to have a great speaker, Professor Heather Barrow and Dr. Trisatya Mastuti Widi. Professor Barrow is happy to share her knowledge regarding towards sustainable beef cattle crossbreeding in Indonesia. And Dr. Trisatya Mastuti Widi will give presentation in relation to genetic impact assessment. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for this session, Mas Nuzul Widias, SPT MSc. Mas Widias held her bachelor degree in 2005 in Department of Animal Science, Faculty of Agriculture, Universitas Sebelas Maret, and her master degree in 2010 at Master Program of Animal Science, Wageningen University and Research. At this moment, Mas Nuzul Widias is working as lecturer in Department of Animal Science, Faculty of Agriculture, Universitas Sebelas Maret. Now, allow me to welcome the moderator for this session, Mas Nuzul Widias. Mas Nuzul, time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Bu Lili. So, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
My name is Nuzul Widias, and I'm going to host today's scientific part of the event. Before we start, I would like to open this with some acknowledgement. I hope you can see my slides by now. So I would like to thank the Webmaster team of the Master Program of Animal Sciences, Universitas Sebelas Maret, and ISPI, Sarjana Peternakan, Ikatan Sarjana Peternakan Indonesia, for facilitating this event. And then I would like also to thank our think tank team, these people here. So we are just like a small group of people with the same concern on Indonesian local animal genetic resources. And we are passionate about improving their condition. We are looking forward to have close collaboration in the future to get more opportunities to voice and act for our genetic resources. We hope that our local animals can have all the appreciation and attention they deserve. Okay, that was my sponsored content. Now let us head to the main show. Crossbreeding has been applied in Indonesia without any sufficient control and no access for evaluation. This case is especially true for beef cattle. Relevant stakeholders share their roles in this uncontrolled utilization of cattle breeds and or crossbred as female breeding stock. This, of course, has disturbed the overall breeding program. This issue have made the sustainability of the currently running crossbreeding program questionable and also put our local cattle genetic resources under threat. This webinar will discuss about the sustainable crossbreeding program while accounting for the issues of conserving, maintaining, and wisely utilizing our local genetic resources. Today we have two experts whom willing to share their knowledge with us. We have Professor Heather Burrow. She has been so kind to let us call her Bu Heather. We'll talk about the sustainable crossbreeding, especially in the tropical climates. And then Ibu Tri Satyamastuti Widi, or Ibu Fitri, will tell us about her research on the impact of crossbreeding on our beef cattle population. So without further ado, I will read the profile of our first speaker. Professor Heather Burrow is a professional research fellow in the University of New England, Australia. She got her PhD in animal breeding and genetics, specializing in tropical beef cattle with additional training in agricultural business and leadership. Currently, she leads the beef cattle projects in Indonesia and South Africa that are funded by the Australian Centre of International Agricultural Research. She is also a member of the Independent Steering Committee of the CGIAR Livestock CRP, which operates across the Institute in Africa, Asia, and South America. She is also a member of the International Advisory Committee for the Center of Tropical Livestock Genetics and Health, based at the University of Edinburgh, in primary research focus on beef and dairy cattle, both sheep and poultry, for use by smallholder farmers, primarily in Africa and Asia. So we all can see how much experience she have to be shared with us today. So, Ibu Heather, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Nuzul. It is my very great pleasure to be here. I will just share my screen.
Yeah, I will stop my screen sharing, okay?
Okay, and I hope you can all see that.
Yeah, we can see that already.
Okay, that is good news. Given the difficulties of travelling at the moment, I am very, very pleased to be able to be with you, even remotely, and particularly to discuss a topic that I think is very, very important for Indonesia, and particularly to see the title that I was given is around sustainable beef cattle breeding or crossbreeding. So I hope I do justice to the talk, but before I start, I would like to apologise very much that I am speaking in English. I am making an assumption, or I am hoping that your English is very much better than my Bahasa. So my apologies. I will try to speak slowly, and I will also try to answer any of your questions. Please interrupt me if you don't understand anything. So first of all, I thought I should address the question of why crossbreeding, and why might crossbreeding offer some potential for Indonesia. So firstly, and my apologies if I am going back far too much in terms of basics, but crossbreeding combines the favourable attributes of two or more breeds to improve both productive and adaptive traits. And I was very pleased to hear in one of the introductory talks about the focus not only on productive traits such as growth or reproduction or beef quality, but also the importance of adaptive traits. Because in Indonesia, the need for tropically adapted cattle is critical, but it is often overlooked by by advocates of breeding who don't really understand the implications of
excuse me, Bu Heather, can you please make the PowerPoint on a slideshow mode?
Okay, so I have it on, what about, does that help more?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I had it on 2 screens, so okay. So have I managed to convey the messages so far? Or
Yes, yes, of course.
Yes, that's fine now.
Yeah.
Righto. So the next point about why crossbreeding is, and this is probably more important than it's combining the favourable attributes, but correct crossbreeding can actually generate what we call heterosis or hybrid vigour from combining the unrelated breeds. And heterosis or hybrid vigour is perhaps the only free feed cattle producers are ever going to get from their business. So this is particularly important if you can get a free feed. You don't have to pay for it. The way you get that is by generating this heterosis or hybrid vigour. Now, I'm going to present some results here. They are primarily from Northern Australia, and that's where my background is, primarily in Northern Australia, but also for temperate environments from the USA. And most of the designed crossbreeding experiments have taken place in both Northern Australia and USA. And so I was unable to get a lot of information from Indonesia or other parts of the world, but I think that what I can present should be able to be adapted for use in Indonesia. And so based on those results from Northern Australia and the USA, the greatest heterosis occurs with the use of the most diverse breeds and also for the least heritable traits such as reproduction. And I'll explain this a little bit more in following slides. So in terms of the heterosis, I have divided this up into productive and adaptive traits. And here we are looking at adaptive traits. And as you will see from this title on the horizontal axis, what I am looking at is the amount of heterosis relative to the mean or the midpoint of the performance of the parental breeds, so breed A and breed B used for crossbreeding. And this is in a tropical or whatever environment we're looking at. Now, heterosis can be either favourable, in other words, it is a plus, or it can be unfavourable. And based on the work from Australia and the USA, there is favourable heterosis for weaning weight, ranging from 4% to 13%. The heterosis for carcass weight is slightly less, but nevertheless it is favourable. And for calving rate, for the number of calves that are born, the heterosis ranges from 4% to 22%. And again, it is all favourable. What I should say, though, is that there is more heterosis for a Bos Indicus crossed with a Bos Taurus. So in other words, a Brahman crossed with, say, a British or a European breed than between Bos Taurus and Bos Taurus. So Hereford or Shorthorn cross. So what we are seeing are these higher levels of heterosis are coming from the Bos Indicus by Bos Taurus crosses because they are more divergent. If we look at beef tenderness, which is also a trait that I call a productive trait, the way that beef tenderness is measured is through shear force. So that is the amount of force that you need to cut through a slice of meat. And in that case, the higher the shear force score or the shear force measurement, the tougher the beef. So in this case, the favourable heterosis is actually negative. We are looking for a lower score to be more tender. And so in this case, the tenderness ranged from -7% to -3%. It is favourable, but it was measured only in Bos Indicus by Bos Taurus or Brahman by British. And so the heterosis exists, but it is nowhere near as strong as in calving rate. So we need to remember that heterosis, even a minus sign, can be favourable, as in the case of beef tenderness. If we look at the adaptive traits, again, we are seeing, I should describe what these adaptive traits are. We have tick count, we have worm egg count, and we have rectal temperature as a measure of heat tolerance. And in the case of all of those, we are looking for a lower score to indicate a better, so fewer ticks, the more resistant an animal is. The fewer worms, the more resistant. And the lower the rectal temperature, the more tolerant to heat the animal is. And so again, we are seeing favourable heterosis for all of those traits. And in this graph, it looks very large, the size of the heterosis. But that is to be explained because this work was from Northern Australia, and we were able to directly compare tick counts, worm counts, and rectal temperature of both British breeds and Brahman breeds in a very harsh tropical environment. Now that is unlikely to be the case in Indonesia. You're not going to be running purebred British cattle, or I'd hope you're not going to be running purebred British cattle and trying to manage them in that tropical environment. And so if we take the example just of tick count, in Brahmins, you might see a typical average tick count of all the Brahman animals, say of 10 to 20 ticks per one side of an animal. But in a British animal, you might be seeing several hundred ticks on one side of an animal. So if you're looking at the mid-parent mean and the performance of the crossbred relative to the mid-parent mean, you're going to get a huge measure. But if you are looking at a well-adapted dam breed, such as the Bali or Ongol, which I am assuming you will be using in Indonesia, you are not going to be able to measure heterosis anywhere near this example. We would be looking at a much smaller response in measurements, and I'll try to explain that a little bit more. But what the take-home message really is that you are going to get far more heterosis for a trait like calving rate or weaning rate than you will for most of the other traits in Indonesian conditions. So before I get on to more of the results, I just thought I would touch on the crossbreeding systems, because there are any number of crossbreeding systems that are possible, and many of them are very difficult to implement. Even in Northern Australia, crossbreeding, a designed crossbreeding program is not as straightforward as you would think. At the moment, I think a two-breed cross is possibly the only currently feasible system for smallholder farmers in Indonesia. I did see in the background of one of the presenters was showing a video and what looked like Australian cattle in the background, and under the commercial systems that operate those feedlots, it might be possible to look at other options. But I think the important thing is that whatever options are considered, they have to be very practical, very easy to implement. And so I'm thinking that this system here, this two-breed cross, is feasible with some provisos. So if we look at a cow breed, I'm thinking that we would be looking at Ongol or Bali cattle, and then would be crossed to an unrelated breed. And we can have any breeds, but I have certainly seen recommendations from people in Indonesia suggesting that Belgian Blue might be a good breed. And I will talk about that later, but it could be any breed here, as long as it's not related, it's unrelated to the cow breed. So we have a bull of breed A and a cow of breed B producing first cross progeny, 50% of each breed. Now, under the current system, I understand that most of these first cross progeny are actually slaughtered. I know that there is a rule about slaughtering females in Indonesia that I understand is either not adhered to or is bypassed or is ignored in Indonesia, because I have certainly seen crossbred females in the smallholder systems, the intensive feeding systems of smallholder farmers in Indonesia. The big problem with this whole system is that if you are going to be slaughtering all the first cross progeny, then I'm just seeing all of a sudden that I am scribbling on my slides, which is much more effective, but I was wondering what was going on there. So my apologies for that disruption. But the problem is that if we are going to be slaughtering all of these progeny, then how are we going to keep sufficient cows of these well-adapted breeds, the Bali or the Ongol? So that's a consideration that we need to consider. The logical thing would be to crossbreed these female progeny if that was feasible. So we'll consider it a bit further. So another option might be to backcross. The problem with backcrossing, and I should just explain, we've got our female progeny, and so rather than selling all the F1 female males and females, we should market all the male progeny, but we could use the female progeny to backcross to another breed or to another parental breed. So we could use this first cross Bali by British animal or Bali by Belgian Blue animal, and then cross it back to the same bull breed. So in this case, it might be, so if we use Bali by Simmental, and then we have the Bali Simmental cross back to a Simmental, ending up with an animal that is 75% Simmental and 25% Bali, with all of those animals sold. The problem with this cross is that 75% Simmental is going to be poorly adapted to Indonesia's production system. So we need to be very, very careful about how you would implement a back crossing system. And so I'll talk again a bit more about possibilities there. The third system that I'm looking at is a potential 3-breed cross, and I indicate that this is logistically difficult for Indonesian smallholder farmers, but I can also assure you that this system and a number of other crossbreeding systems, rotational back crossing and all sorts of combinations are difficult for Australian farmers. So this is not just a consideration for Indonesia, it's also a consideration for other production systems in tropical environments. So this one would see that you would have, we've got our first cross female joined to a different sire breed, and all of the animals that are produced would then be marketed. But again, we come back to the same problem of how do we retain sufficient, well-adapted female animals for breeding purposes. So that's a consideration. So the last system that I'm going to talk about now, I'm not going to run through the whole lot of these, but is a composite development. And this looks enormously complex, but I actually think that this system could be implemented in Indonesia with some provisos. If we have our first cross, Bali by Simmental female crossed to another composite breed, and then you can intersay mate. It would be exactly the same as mating Bali to Bali or Ongol to Ongol, except in this case you would have a tropically adapted composite mated either through natural mating or AI, artificial insemination, using using an intersay mating and a very straightforward breeding system. So I think there are some possibilities to look at, providing the animals that are being joined are tropically adapted or well adapted to the production system. So one thing that I would like to propose here is that all the crossbreeding theory talks about breeds. But what I would like to suggest is that we should be considering breed types for production in tropical environments. Primarily because you might have, for example, large differences between a Friesian or a Jersey in milk production and Hereford or Angus, for example. But if you put those same breeds as pure breeds into the tropics and you measure milk production, you are going to see no difference whatsoever because those breeds are very poorly adapted to the ticks or the worms or the heat or whatever the stress is, the high humidity in the tropics. And so we can think in terms of crossbreeding in Indonesia or Northern Australia as being breed types. And I'll just run through those very briefly. So first of all, we have the Bos Taurus. These are either, I'm calling them British or continental, and I'll give you some examples very quickly. So in the case of the Bos Taurus, we have breeds like Angus, Murray Grey, Shorthorn and Hereford. These are very productive in temperate environments, but they are poorly adapted, but we'll run through that briefly shortly. We also have the continental breeds or the European breeds, the Charolais, the Belgian Blue, the Simmental and the Limousin. And they have different attributes to the British breeds. We also have the Bos Indicus breeds that I have mentioned, and You are familiar certainly with the Brahman and the Ongol. We have examples from South America, the Nulur and the Gia, and all of these breeds derived from the Indian subcontinent. So you're very familiar, I'm sure, with the Bos Indicus breeds. We also have a third breed grouping, which I call the tropically adapted taurine breeds. These are breeds that are defined or characterized as Bos taurus, but because they evolved in harsh tropical environments, such as in Africa and South America, they are more adapted to the tropical environments. And I'll give you some examples of those. I'm mentioning also here stabilized crosses between a range of these breeds, between Bos taurus, Bos indicus, and the tropically adapted taurine breeds. And these include the Santa Gertrudis, Bonsmara, Senepal, tropical composite. And again, I'll give you some examples. And finally, we have an entirely different subspecies, which you are extremely familiar with, Bos javanicus. So I'll just give you some photographic examples. So the tropically adapted taurine breeds, we have the Africana, Tuli, and the Nguni, all from Southern Africa, from south of the Zambezi River in South Africa. And we have the Romo Sinuano, which evolved in Central America, places like Colombia in America. And all of these breeds are true Bos taurus, which means they have the similar attributes as the Bos taurus in terms of productive attributes, but because they evolved in tropical climates, they are better adapted than the British or European breeds. We have the stabilized composites. So you were probably familiar with either a Santa Gertrudis or a Browford or a Droughtmaster that are composites, stabilized composites between Brahman and British breeds. And in the case of the Santa Gertrudis, they are about 3/8 Brahman, 5/8 Shorthorn. We have a composite, stabilized composite. The Belmont Red and Bonsmara breeds are almost identical. I see somebody has raised their hand. So does somebody want to ask a question? Or should I just continue?
I think it's better for you to continue first, Bu Heather. Then we will try to collect the question for later.
Okay, that makes it easy. Okay, so we have a stabilized composite here. The Belmont Red and Bonsmara are almost identical. They differ. The Belmont Red was developed in Australia, Bonsmara in South Africa, based on the Africana, and slightly different British breeds, but they are a stabilized composite that could be considered pure Bos taurus. In the case of what I'm calling tropical composite, these animals have around 1/3 Bos indicus, 1/3 of the Sanga or Criollo breeds from Southern Africa or South America, and 1/3 British or continental. And I just wanted to establish what I'm talking about here because I've got some figures that I want you to understand that I'll present very shortly. And as I said, you're all familiar with the Bos javanicus, which to me is a pretty special breed. It is very unique in terms of its chromosomes, but it also has attributes that mean it needs to be considered in any breeding program for places like Indonesia or elsewhere in Asia. I think it has applications in many tropical environments. So what I'm going to do now is just give you some sort of indication of how well these different breed types perform, but only in tropical environments. I don't think we're interested in temperate environments. The thing that I need to emphasize here, though, is that we don't actually have comparisons, direct comparisons between the Bos Taurus, between the British, the continental, the Bos Indicus, and Bos javanicus. We definitely have direct comparisons between those breeds, but not for the barley. So I have inferred the results here. And I'm looking here at the productive traits. So we've got growth rate, we've got mature size also as an indication of growth, and weaning rate, the number of calves that are weaned. And in tropical environments, you will see that the British and the continental breeds that are highly productive in temperate environments actually have pretty poor reproduction, weaning rates and growth rates. I should indicate that the higher the number, the better the performance. So this is on a 1 to 5 scale, and 5 is the best, 1 is the worst. And so in a tropical environment, the purebred British or the purebred continental do not grow well and do not reproduce well, but eventually they reach their potential mature size. On the other hand, in the tropical environment, the Bos Indicus will grow well and will reach their normal mature size, but Bos Indicus are known to be subfertile, so their weaning rate, whereas barley cattle have moderate or intermediate growth rate. I believe they have better weaning rates than the other breeds. Whether they justify having a 5, I don't know. No direct comparisons. And their mature size is smaller. In terms of meat quality, the Bos Taurus, the British and the continental breeds will deliver good meat quality. But again, the Bos Indicus breeds are known to have tough meat. We have no evidence at all from the barley cattle. But I am also reasonably confident that based on some work that we are doing in NTB with Pakdalan from Unram and Paktanda from Bekatipi in NTB, that there are meat processing, animal management and meat processing techniques that can be applied to guarantee meat quality, even from Bos Indicus. We've applied those in Australia, and so I think that we can manage meat quality without having to worry too much about it. In terms of the adaptive traits, tick resistance, heat tolerance, drought tolerance, you see that all of the British breeds and continental breeds have very poor performance, whereas the Bos Indicus breeds are extremely well adapted. And I think that the barley cattle are probably on a par with the Bos Indicus for both heat and for drought tolerance, and probably not far off in terms of tick resistance. It's not possible to really be absolutely sure because the studies haven't been done, but I'm confident that the barley cattle offer a huge potential for improving performance of cattle in Indonesia. So some considerations, or just reiterating, cattle in tropical environments need to be highly productive. So they have to have good growth, good reproduction, but it's essential that they are also well adapted. And the greatest heterosis is achieved by crossing the least related breed types. So how do we figure out the degree of relationship between breed types? And for that, I've just gone to the literature, and I know you won't be able to read these breeds very well, but this is a study that was published a few years ago based on the bovine, the genome sequencing project. And the important thing is that both the horizontal axis and the vertical axis show degrees of relatedness. And so here we can see that animals that are reasonably close on the horizontal axis, it comes up to about here, until it starts diverging. And we are seeing all the British and the British and continental breeds. So starting from the smallest of the British breeds, the Dexters, and going up to the largest of the European breeds, such as the Chianina. So those breeds differ in terms of the vertical, but they are similar on the horizontal axis. But then we start diverging out here on the horizontal axis, and what we are picking up here are all the tropically adapted taurine breeds and the composite breeds based on Brahman and British. So we've got that grouping in the middle. Then we have across here from Nellore down to the Brahman and Ongol, we're seeing the Bos Indicus breeds that are again different from the British breeds on the horizontal axis as well as the vertical. And right up the very top is the Bos Javanicus, or the barley breed. And so if you were looking to cross the most divergent breeds, you would be looking at barley and some of the Hereford Angus Shorthorn breeds. If you were aiming to generate maximum heterosis, that seems to be the case, that you would achieve that through that divergent crossing. So, if we then assume that we've crossed those least related breeds to produce females, so we might have barley or Ongol crossed with British or continental bulls, producing crossbred, first cross females. If those females were available for breeding, it would be possible to consider joining them back to the tropically adapted composite breed. So if we go back here, if our first cross was based on a barley by some of these breeds or even some of these breeds, we could then back cross to these tropically adapted taurine breeds, and that would deliver animals that are very well adapted. If the right breeds were chosen, you would have, in effect, a tropical composite that had an admix of the British continental, the Bos Javanicus, Bos Indicus, and also the tropically adapted taurine. And those animals we know are very well adapted. And in fact, something like that, minus the Bos Javanicus, is actually the most profitable breed type for Northern Australia. And so I'm just going to now run very briefly through some profitability figures that we looked at from Northern Australia. This paper was published in 2003, so I'm expecting that the differences are probably worth more now than they were back in 2003. But the profitability estimates have been calculated through two phases. The first phase is a breeding and growing phase, and the second one is looking at where you finish the cattle either on grass or on grain, as we do in Australia. So the production system is quite different, but I think the figures will nevertheless apply in Indonesia. So what we compared in these estimates were a straight bred Brahman herd, a terminal crossbred herd where we used a Brahman dam and then crossed it to an unrelated sire breed. In this instance, it was a Tuli, a Sanger breed from Southern Africa, to produce a tropically adapted F1 progeny that were all slaughtered. And then we had a tropical composite, which was this admixture of Bos indicus, Bos taurus, and tropically adapted taurine. There were 3 points around the data. There was a large amount of data from a wide range of Northern Australian sites, from extremely harsh sites through to something like these photos were all taken in central Queensland, where there's a very distinct wet and dry season. In the wet season, abundant pasture; in dry season, pretty poor pasture. We were looking at export markets to Japan or Korea, and they required a very large carcass that is not typical of Indonesia. And we looked at grass and grain finishing. And the main differences in the performance related to the differences in the sale progeny, how well they performed during the finishing phase. And in the case of the composite, we had improved reproduction in the composite cow breed. And as you'll recall from earlier, we were expecting the greatest response to be seen to reproduction rather than the growing and the finishing. So if we look just at this stage at the breeding and growing, what I've got here is the differences relative to the Brahmins. So differences of the terminal crossbred and the composite breed relative to the Brahmin, and the figures are a gross margin, which is basically income minus expenses. So it's another indication of profit. And the figures I've got down here are in dollars, Australian dollars, but if you multiply by 10 or 11,000, you'll get an indication of the figures in rupiah. And so for the terminal crossbred, we have the Brahman dam, but an unrelated sire breed. The gross margin, the improved gross margin, is $7 per animal for that terminal crossbred. If you then look at the performance, the $7 for the improved performance of the sale animal, you get an additional $17 per animal for the reproductive component of this breeding and growing system. And so if you then convert that to rupiah, you will see that that's a fairly sizable advantage of the composite over the either the terminal crossbred or the Brahmin. If you then move on to a grain finishing scenario, and I know that grain finishing is not practiced by the smallholder farmers in general, but it would apply to lamb toro or some of the other legumes. If you can keep the animals growing using some form of intensive system, then I think you would be seeing the differences we're seeing here. And in Australia, we pay, there are markets that pay a premium for the tenderness, guaranteed tenderness. The differences, these differences are from, but the differences now are much larger and they apply to most animals. We were already able to prove that with barley cattle through this project I was talking about with Pakdalan and Paktanda in NTB. So I think that it would be very easy to obtain a premium market for tenderness. For example, beef that was sold to the tourism industry in Indonesia or the high-end retail. In our case, we had to deliver marbling, which are the flecks of intramuscular fat, for our Japanese and Korean markets. And there was a premium to be obtained for marbling, and marbling also influences tenderness. And then differences in growth rate and feed efficiency during the finishing phase. So this was, the last 3 months of an animal's life. So in total, if we have $9, $5 and $38, or convert it to rupiah, the extra gross margin for each animal was $52, or more than 52,000 rupiah. And we should add in the base model, the $7 for the terminal crossbred and the $24 for the breeding and growing phases. So there's a significant additional profit to be made from crossbreeding. So what role is there for crossbreeding in Indonesia? I believe that crossbreeding of barley and Ongol cows is likely to significantly increase live weights of their progeny, and the F1 progeny are likely to be as resistant to stressors as their dams. And the stressors I'm talking about here are ticks and worms and heat and humidity. What's not clear to me is whether those F1 crossbred females are fertile, because I've looked through some of the literature, and I admit that I haven't looked at any of the literature in Bahasa, but there's an inference in some of them that perhaps the females may not be fertile. The F1 females may not be fertile. I can understand why that might be the case, crossing Bos javanicus to something like a Brahman or a British animal. There may be chromosomal differences there, but if those crossbred females can be retained for breeding, there's likely to be a significant increase in reproductive performance, and particularly relative to the Ongol. And there should be no problem at all in crossbreeding an F1 Ongol by British, for example, because we know that Bos indicus by Bos taurus can be crossed without problems. The proviso is that those first cross females have to be joined to well-adapted sire breeds if the progeny are going to be useful for Indonesia. Again, I'm uncertain of the situation. I've seen reports that suggest that the male F1 crossbreds from barley cows are sterile. I haven't been able to find any data to confirm that, but they may be either sterile or subfertile. So those considerations need to be, we need to consider those factors in terms of recommendations on how to go forward with a crossbreeding program for Indonesia. But these recommendations, particularly around growth and reproduction, I believe will apply to both the intensive and extensive production systems in Indonesia. And I probably don't need to demonstrate what I'm talking about, but the intensive systems might be something like the commercial feedlots that we saw in the video at the start of this seminar, or they might be the smallholder cut and carry systems for smallholder farmers in Indonesia. And the extensive systems could be similar to these. So the take-home messages, Crossbreeding does improve cattle performance in extensive and intensive production systems, at least in Northern Australia and the US, and can significantly increase the farm profitability. The improvements will be greater if the F1 females are bred to well-adapted sire breed types. As the new or higher quality beef markets are being developed in Indonesia along the lines that I was speaking about in NTB, then even greater profits could accrue from the use of crossbred slaughter cattle. But the big proviso is that these predictions need to be validated with well-designed research in Indonesia, including addressing the logistical challenges. And these might be, where are you going to source bulls from? Where are you going to source semen from? How do you gain confidence that the bulls that might be being joined are superior or will do the job in Indonesia? So there's a whole range of logistical challenges in addition to, whether crossbreeding works and whether the F1 females, the F1 Bos Javanicus by something else are even fertile. So all of those things need to be addressed through research. I think they can be done in a, it's not going to require years and years of research or huge amounts of money to do this research. I think it can be a targeted research program, but I think it's very, very important that the research be done in Indonesia to prove that the systems will work in Indonesia. So thank you very much for your attention and for organising this seminar. As I said, I think it is a vitally important issue for consideration.
Bu Heather, Pak Timur. Okay, thank you very much for delivering the topic, Bu Heather. Your remarks are really on point, so we are really happy to hear that. So now we move on to the second speaker. Before we start with the second speaker, I would like to read her resume. Okay, the second speaker is Dr. Tri Satyamastuti. She is also as Ibu Fitri. She is an associate professor at the Faculty of Animal Science, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Indonesia, and she got her PhD in animal production system in Wageningen University with professional engineering certified. She is currently the head of study program of Animal Science and Industry, Faculty of Animal Science, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and additionally, she is also an adjunct lecturer at the University of New England. So now we know her resume and her specialization. Let us welcome Ibu Fitri. Ibu Fitri, the time is yours. Ibu Fitri, do you have problems or is it okay? Okay.
Still mute.
Bu Fitri, you are still mute.
Sorry, Ibu Nusul.
Yeah.
I was trying to look for the unmute button.
Go ahead.
Is my slide clear to see? Yeah. Thank you, Ibu Nusul. The Honorable Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, University of Sebelas Maret, Professor Samanhudi, and maybe in this time the representative Dr. Eka Handayanta, the head of Master Program, Faculty of Agriculture, University of Sebelas Maret, Dr. Adi Magna, the chairman of ISPI, Insinyur Didi Purwanto, and Professor Heather Buro. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, selamat pagi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Bapak Ibu, I'm glad to be here to share and discuss with you regarding sustainable crossbreeding of beef cattle in Indonesia. And I'm also going to little bit share my work during my PhD because it was very relevant. The topic I'm going to share with you is the need of genetic impact assessment for the crossbreeding with the exotic beef breeds in the mixed farming system. In this case, it's a smallholder farming system in Indonesia. Perhaps it's quite different situation with Australia or other developed countries that now I am talking about the mixed farming system or smallholder farming system. Yeah, as we understand well that the Indonesian population right now is about 267 millions of people, and the cattle population is about 17 million, and more than 60% of the population is in Java Island because the consumers of beef cattle are mostly living in Java. And when we look at the trend of supply and demand of the beef cattle, I got this data from Pak Didi, Pak Didi, but sorry, it is in Indonesian, Prof. Peter. If we look at the three sources from the Kapus Pindo, from the Livestock Statistic Bureau, and from the Dirjen PKH, it's a bit different, but almost the same. There is a gap between supply and consumption of beef cattle, and it is predicted until 2030, yeah, that there is always a gap between them. So we have to realize that. And if we look at the value chain of the cattle, the share market, this cattle and beef cattle in Indonesia, 90% is shared by smallholder farmers. So the intermediate or big farmers, or maybe large scale companies like feedlot, it's less than 10%. And and as we understand that the smallholder farmers are characterized by small ownership of cattle, less than 5 heads, And they keep livestock, especially cattle, for many kind of things such as saving, manure, cultures, social status, drought, and hobby. You can see in Indonesia, especially in Java, farmers only have less than 5 heads, and they sell the cattle when they need for big expenditure like to buy motorcycle or to send children to school, to university. And it's quite different with the situation in developed countries or developed region where cattle are kept for single purpose, for instance, for meat or milk production. And when we look back the history of cattle breed developed in Indonesia, it's about 3,500 before century. Banteng were widespread in the Southeast Asian mainland, including Yunnan province, now China, and extending to Borneo and Java through peninsular Malaysia, and eastern India and Bali were probably part of the range. So in Bali, banteng were domesticated and nowadays now known as Bali cattle. And about 1,500 years ago, Bos indicus or Cebu cattle actually had been introduced to Indonesia, brought by probably traders at that time. And banteng had successfully been crossed with the Cebu cattle, which cross had resulted in Java, Madura, and the Sumatra cattle. Yeah, originally, apart from the small differences, the breed found on Madura, Sumatra, and Java were the same. But yeah, and in some areas in Indonesia, cattle has specific role in cultural events. Yeah, let's take an example of Madura cattle, where Madura cattle was kept pure-blooded by the Madures for probably almost 1,500 years. And I may say that this is an example of successful crossbreeding. In the 19th, there was felt a need to upgrade small indigenous cattle with stronger and bigger animals, which were able to pull the heavy laden carts, especially in sugar plantation, for which the Ongol was selected at that time. And in Java, this crossbred, which came into existence at the end of the 19th century, was called Java Ongol, or some people call it as Ongol Grade, and is familiar as Peranakan Ongol or PO. Since 1914, Ongol were maintained pure in Sumba Island to fulfill the growing demand of Ongol bulls in Java, and was called as Sumba Ongol. Until the late 1980s, the Java Ongols was commonly seen in Java, but since 1990s, many crosses have presented an interesting position such as limousine and cimental, yeah, which will be discussed in the next slide. The introduction of Bos Taurus by Indonesian government have been started since 1980s as a solution to increase meat production. And using exotic breeds like temperate breeds, Bos Taurus with high productivity but less adaptive. they has been crossed through artificial insemination, but their genotype were not well identified. This is a history of crossbreeding in Java, starting in 1980. Yeah, I cannot say that's it's really it's structured breeding or crossbreeding, because it is in a smallholder farming system. So in 1980, Onggol grade or Peranakan Onggol or Java Onggol were crossed with the Simmental Olimousin and resulted F1 Simmental Onggol crossbred, or we call it Simpo or Limpo. And then the farmers tends to backcross with the Simmental Olimousin. It's not the farmer don't stick with the one breed Simmental Olimousin, but they just mix. So I don't know what's the name of the breed actually, and yeah, we agree to say that is Simpo or Limpo, Simmental Onggol bred, crossbred, and Limousin Onggol crossbred. And from 2000 until the present, we can assume that the progeny of the cross already reached 87.5% Simmental blood or Olimousin blood, and about 12.5% of Peranakan Onggol. And at present, many different cattle breeds or types in Indonesia. In the first picture on the left top, I took it in 2005. Still many Onggol breed over there, but later we are difficult to find the Onggol Onggol breed in Java, especially in Yogyakarta. So yeah, there is many kind of crossbreed in Java. And what is the breed's name of the calves? I could not identify well. Maybe this one is a Simmental crossbred, because the characteristic of Simmental is still appear here. But then this one probably Limousin, or I don't know. But the farmers tends to cross whatever they want. So it's really uncontrolled crossbreeding. So we might summarize the reasons of crossbreeding has been existed in Indonesia. In the 19th century, under the cultivation system, coherent to the rising demand for transport, the demand for the livestock rose because the heavy duties posed upon transport animal. There was cry for strong animals with stamina. Yeah, although Madura breed was reportedly one of the best draught animal for size in the world, and Javanese cattle possess exceptional endurance and strength, were lively and very active, but their height was thought as main disadvantage. Besides, Java cattle was not able to walk in pairs in the front of the cart, so that's a government prefer to choose Onggol, because Onggol also has hump, and due to its soft and sensible hooves, the buffalo soon appear unsuitable for transport on paved roads in the 19th century, when the infrastructure were still undeveloped and roads were mainly unpaved. The buffalo was brought into action in places where roads were too slippery for horses. And while in the 1980s, when the national demand of meat was increasing and the need for animal traction was gradually decreasing, Indonesian government has been introducing highly productive breeds such as Limousin, Simmental, Santa Gertrudis, Angus, Hereford, and Carlisle. To change the characteristic of the Ongol or other local cattle breeds to more fleshy type. To the meat of the local breeds were appreciated compared to the newly introduced breed. The growth per day of local cattle is lower. Yeah. We can learn that once introduced by the government, it becomes preference of the farmers, but without any sufficient control and no access for evaluation. So it results breed variation. I can say that this is this one, the point of no return. So once introduced or preferred by the government and applied by the government, then the farmers or the smallholder farmers in this case will change their preference also. And based on our study case in Java, this is finding of our study in 2008 until 2015, that the crossbreed cattle yield 25% more meat compared to local or Ongol cattle. But the gross margin, you can see that actually farmers with Ongol or local breed can obtain the gross margin better than the farmers of crossbreed. So crossbreeding limited possibilities to improve cattle production at the farm level, and it is not reducing rural poverty, but yeah, perhaps contributes to increasing meat production. From our finding was about 25%. Yeah, and if we see the global warming potential and land use are almost the same between Ongol and crossbred. And if we compare to the situation in the developed country or developed region, it's much higher because it's less efficient cattle. We can analyze this problem using probably problem tree analysis tools, where the high preference towards beef meats and increase the income per capita and also increase of human population will result the increase of food demand, including the beef meat. And country tend to intensify their agriculture using high productivity breeds. And then preference of the farmers toward cattle breeds has been changed. That's also result uncontrolled crossbreeding, and farmers don't want to keep local breeds anymore. And along with the inappropriate breeding program, it also result uncontrolled crossbreeding. Then we can predict that the local adapted breed will be vanished. And we lost of potential threats of animal genetic resources in the future. And we also lost of traditional and cultural values attached on local breeds. Yeah, this is become our concern, change the production system. I come to the main concern about the genetic impact assessment. The gap between government's objective, because governments want meat yield, and the farmers has different various function on their livelihood. This practice calls for participatory methodological approach in fulfilling the key stakeholders. Farmers is the key stakeholder in this case, to understand their perception about crossbreeding and to assess the impact of crossbreeding, and finally to design appropriate livestock development strategies for their farming system. Genetic impact assessment actually analog with the environmental impact statements. Perhaps people from environmental concern already done environmental impact assessment. So we adopt from that approach. And the objectives of genetic impact assessment are to make farmers, policymakers, and other stakeholders aware of the consequences of introducing exotic breeds in local production system. By the seminar, I'm also encouraging the audience to be aware and of the consequences of introducing exotic breeds in the local production system, and then to identify the change that required to ensure a successful introduction. Yeah, about the steps of genetic impact assessment. First, we should identify the stakeholders and issues, and the issues refer to the three sustainability pillars, which is in economics and environment and social. And then we identify and assess the indicators, and we put them together into the integrative assessment, and then we get the feedback from the genetic impact assessment. For example, in this case for the smallholder farming system, we found that primary stakeholders are farmers and the policymaker, and perhaps the secondary stakeholder could be the local government, Dinas Peternakan, probably, or inseminators, veterinarians, butcher, traders. Maybe lecturer or researcher can be the secondary stakeholders also. And this is the example from our study that we obtain the issues and indicators, issues from the economic production dimension. For instance, is economic benefits, and the indicator might be used is gross margin. And the cattle performance, growth and reproduction, the indicator is any average daily gain, meat yield or calf crop or whatever it is as far as measurable. Yeah. And then feed, we can also choose or select feed availability issues, and the indicators is dry matter intake. And then farm management, health and disease, and you can determine the indicator of from those issues. And from the social dimension, probably additional functions of cattle, social status, cultural value, for example, sono and karapan cattle, drought power saving, and etc. And this also come to the social dimension, animal welfare, because nowadays the awareness of people towards animal welfare is increasing. So we can also take it into account, and we can have the indicators by scoring the animal welfare. And we can also take environment dimension, and we choose for instance emission, land resource, water resource, whatever. You may select the indicators you consider as important to measure, and it's reliable. You can have reliable data, so we can choose the indicator, and you can obtain the issues from the discussion or focus group discussion with the stakeholders. It's a really important step of genetic impact assessment. When we look at the farmers level, I think the farmers also think like when they see when they want to choose a particular breed, so they think that can I feed them? So can they give a calf per year? It's about the fertility of the calf, of the cattle, and yeah, it is this cattle, this exotic cattle is suitable for the farmers is a question. Yeah, if we do the genetic impact assessment, we also probably think that the animal welfare is the important issue from the social dimension or related to the cattle performance, because then for instance Belgian blue, when or the progeny, when you keep the Belgian blue progeny to be bred with the local cattle, so the calvings they experience the difficulties on calving, so you have to give cesarean, yeah, to bring to the doctor, to the vet, and get a cesarean. So it's considered to animal welfare problem. Yeah. Also the fertility, the fertility. Yeah, the cattle only calve twice in her life year, so it's very expensive, I think. Yeah. So farmers will think that I only have to calve from this cow, for instance. So it's the phenomenon of double muscling and the welfare implication to and fertility implication to the animals should be take into consideration. But back to the problem in our country, that farmers only tends to follow what the government promoted, I think. So we should aware. And I may conclude with this problem that dualism and crossbreeding, we have policy makers which have idea to meet increasing demand for beef, and we have farmers with the multifunctionality of cattle for their livelihood. So I can say that crossbreeding is increasing beef production, but not with more efficient use of resources. And I believe that crossbreeding will continue. As I said, that's the point of no return. So crossbreeding will continue. But we should consider that viable local cattle population are needed, and local breeds still deserve well-designed and implement conservation plans. But how to make the viable local cattle population are needed when we only rely to the smallholder farmers? We cannot ya, kita tidak bisa melarang ya, we cannot prohibit the farmers not to keep the crossbred cattle because they find it very beneficial for their economic condition. So this also what should we think, the take-home message, yeah. What is who are the relevant stakeholders and what their drives and what their drives and the attitudes. Probably the key stakeholder like farmers, what their drives and what their attitudes towards the crossbreeding. We should learn about their drives and their attitudes. Also the policy maker, what are their attitudes, and developing breeding strategies for both local breed and crossbreed, while regarding for the conservation, maintenance, and utilization of local breeds, because we believe that responsible utilization of local breeds is the best way to keep them maintained and conserved. And developing a database with accurate information and provide access to periodically evaluate the breeding program as a control mechanism. Yeah, we we should involve all stakeholders in the attempts to conserve, maintain, and utilize our local breeds. That's what I can share to you, and the discussion is very open. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Ibu Fitri, for the material that you gave us. Now it's time for discussion. First, we have questions that already entered the chat room. So I will try to read them first on the first term, and then maybe on the second term, we will try to have like live questions from the audience. Okay, so the first three questions is addressed to Ibu Heather, and I will read them for you. The first question is from Ahmad Dahlan from the University of Lampung. He is also an alumni from University of New England. He has two questions. The first question is, which one is better for crossbreeding? Is it the Indonesian female cattle and exotic bull, or the Indonesian male cattle with female exotic cattle? That's the first question. And then the second question is, we see that crossbreeding favorable for weaning weight. Does that mean that it is also favorable for adult weight? That was the question from Ahmad Dahlan. And then maybe I will read one more question before I will give the time to Ibu Heather to answer that. The second is from Professor Eka Mutiasari from Unsiah, Aceh. The question is, why we should do crossbreeding when we want to do is to keep the local animal genetic resources. Okay, that was the first two questions. So Ibu Heather, if you would please answer them.
Okay, so it was Nuzul, I missed a little bit of the second question, but I will answer the first question. And that was around whether you should have, if I understand it, introduced or exotic females or exotic males. And I think the difficulty will be getting exotic females.
Exactly.
You actually need very well adapted females. So the only way I can picture that that might work would be the Indonesian government has a requirement for cattle that are the live export cattle from Northern Australia, usually feeder animals to go into the feedlot. But in recent times, the policy has been that for every number of animals, and I'm not exactly sure of what the policy is, but for every number of animals that are allowed in for live export for the feedlot sector, then there must be animals brought in for breeding purposes. And in that instance, I actually think the policy, I think the policy is appropriate, but they haven't gone far enough. They've specified you must introduce breeding cattle. And so those breeding cattle have tended to be Brahmins that have never been handled in their life, that probably don't adapt particularly well to a lot of the smallholder systems that they're introduced into. And so I think that might be one way you would get exotic cattle in well-adapted exotic breeding females. But to me, it's far easier to use your local breed, your barley or your Ongol.
Exactly, yes.
It doesn't make a lot of sense trying to do it the other way. So there was some static on your line, so I missed the second question.
Okay, the second question from the same person, from the first person who asked the question, is that when we see that the crossbreeding has favorable for weaning weight, does it also mean that it is also favorable for adult weight or mature weight?
Yes, it does translate, but there are factors that come into play so that, it depends on the mature size of the parental breeds. So yes, if you're going to have one of the parental breeds being your large European breeds, you're going to end up with a large mature size. And from my perspective, a large mature size is not actually what's needed in Indonesia, because a large mature size means that the animal has to be fed a lot.
Yes.
And to me, that is a lot more difficult than having a medium size or even a smaller animal that is highly productive. So you have your barley cattle that don't grow particularly well to a mature size, but if they reproduce, and produce one calf every year and don't require anywhere near the feed that an exotic breed that has a large mature size needs, then to me the more efficient will be your smaller barley cattle.
Yeah. Okay.
And there was a third question which I also missed.
Yeah, there's a question about when we want our local genetic resources, why we should do crossbreeding? That was the question.
So it's a trade-off. The farmers clearly want to make more money. And so if they make more money or can have easier production systems or something that impacts on their business favourably, then they will be looking for that. But in terms of conservation and preservation of those genetic resources, then it's very important to maintain those local breeds. And I think that crossbreeding actually gives you the option of doing both, providing you have a very, so in my example of a two breed or a formation of a composite breed, you know, there was always coming back to the question, so how are we going to maintain, in this instance that I was using, how are we going to maintain the barley breed? You know, we've got to have those adapted cows available to maintain the crossbreeding program. Without them, you're not going to get the heterosis. So I think you can combine both.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So for the next session, I would like to ask the audience if anybody want to ask the question directly. Please raise your hand.
Bu Nuzul, there is two questions in the chat from Mas Tristianto Nugroho.
Yes, I saw that also, but I would like to give some opportunities for the audience if they want to ask them directly or to the speaker.
Bu Nuzul, I'm happy to go through those questions and type response to those questions if that's one way of dealing with those.
Okay, because we have, I think, two more questions addressed for you and also for Bu Fitri actually from the chat. But I'm afraid if I only read from the chat, if anybody wants to ask them directly, then I wouldn't have a chance to give them.
May I have question directly?
Okay.
Bu Nuzul.
Okay, please, Pak Ika.
Okay. Thank you, Bu Nuzul. Ibu Hida, you mentioned about Belgian blue in the beginning. It will be very good if I can have your comment or opinion about the introduction of Belgian blue in Indonesia, because now already in our smallholder farmer, they asked me about where I can have the straw of Belgian blue. I want to use it for my cow, for example. So I am worried about this. And it will be very valuable, if you can give your suggestion for us. Thank you.
Yes, so I have probably been invited to this seminar because I have been expressing opinions about a recommendation from your former Minister for Agriculture that smallholder farmers needed to introduce Belgian blue. And to me, they would be absolutely the last option I would choose because, you know, we've already talked about large cattle needing far more feed than smaller cattle. So you introduce something like a Belgian blue, you're going to have to find the feed to maintain that animal's growth and reproduction. It is a very poorly adapted breed, so it's not going to be suitable to tropical environments, except perhaps as a first cross with an Ongol, for example. But even the crossbreds, you know, they may only have one copy of the double muscling gene, but that may cause calving difficulties. So I liked Bu Fitri's diagram, which I took to be a Belgian blue, but yeah, I'm very skeptical.
Okay, Pak Ika, is there any follow-up?
Thank you, Bu Nuzul. I think it's enough.
Okay, there was one more audience who wants to ask directly from Mr. Maulana Naji. Are you still there, Sir?
Yes. So thank you very much for very interesting presentations from both of the speakers. So as I think we're familiar with the somehow the dairy production system where cows are in confinement and like mating programs are done via artificial insemination. And so like we can have assured that the cows are mating with selected indent bulls somehow. But as I assume in beef production system where the breeding programs are running is cows and bulls are mixed together in pasture for natural mating somehow. For Professor Hitter, do you think would it be possible to do crossbreeding with intended mating plan in the free-range pasture, or should it also be in captivity for implementing this kind of crossbreeding like terminal or composite mating plans? And how is it actually running in Austria, for example? And the second question for Professor Widi, do we have actually breeding program for local breeds, let's say like for Bali or Madura cattle to improve the genetic gain? And do we also have like kind of center where this kind of center maintaining pure breeds of these animals? So like if anybody are interested to start, let's say a crossbreeding program, then they can easily get pure steers or heifers to start with. Yeah, I don't know whether, is it clear the questions for both of the speakers?
Yes, I think it's pretty clear for us.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So if I just talk about the, how you would do the crossbreeding in beef cattle, I have been surprised at the possibility of artificial insemination in smallholder farms in Indonesia. It's much. It seems to be more feasible in Indonesia than it is in Northern Australia. Artificial insemination is not at all used or is very infrequently used in Northern Australia because of the feasibility issue. So if this is one of the questions I raised right at the end where I said, we need research not only about crossbreeding, but also about the logistics of that crossbreeding. If AI, artificial insemination, is feasible, then I think it would be possible to introduce the exotic breed bull to produce an F1 and possibly to form a composite breed using another exotic breed, and then from then on it would be natural mating. But I don't know enough about Indonesia's breeding systems more generally to know what would be feasible. I've been, as I said, I've been surprised at the number of crossbreds that I've seen, but whether that is more broadly applied, I don't know. So, it will be difficult to do natural mating on smallholder farms with exotic breed bulls. So, it would be my answer to that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. The next question is for Bu Fitri. There's a question that it's about, are there any center to maintain this purebred that is used for like the material for crossbreeding?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Pak Maulana Naci, Mr. Maulana Naci. Yes. It is the center of, sorry, I missed the center of crossbreeding or the center of local breed.
Was the center? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Maulana.
Yeah, it's the center for the local breed, the pure one, because if we
yes, for Bali cattle we have a center for that in Bali Island, and as I know that Bali cattle is conserved pure in Bali Island, and other breed cannot to be put in to be kept in Bali Island. So for the Bali cattle, we have the center, and for Madura cattle, the purebred is conserved purely in Sapudi Island. But I see that I don't know. It's really complicated situation in Madura for Madura cattle, because I see that the Madura cattle, even though it's conserved in the Sapudi Island, but there is no selection within population, for instance. So, and also for the people, it's difficult to change their preference, their thought, because I did my research also in Sapudi Island, and people only like to mate the cattle naturally. So the insemination, artificial insemination is difficult to apply in the Sapudi Island. And in while in the mainland of Madura, starting in 2000, I think, there was crossbreeding with limousine, because limousine had a red color like Bali, like Madura cattle. So people who don't have a good Madura cattle like Sono, they tend to cross with limousine. So I worry that the Madura cattle, gradually will be replaced with the limousine crossbred in Madura mainland. Am I clear, Pak Maulana?
Okay, thank you. So, because I read the paper from Ibu Fitri, I think I would like to add a little that in Sapudi Island it is conserved, but there's a negative selection on the body size, because they tend to mate their female with the champion of the bull race. So the bull race is smaller than normal cattle, so there will be negative selection, and the inbreeding is very high.
Yes.
Because they only want to mate their animal with the champion, and no other males are involved, so the inbreeding is very high. So I think we need to do something with that also. Thank you very much, Mr. Maulana, for the question. And actually there are more questions, but we don't have much time, so I will read one more question. This is from Mr. Tristianto Nugroho. The first question is for Professor Heather. At the conclusion of the presentation, F1 was best as a result of crossbreeding. Actually, up to what generation can crossbreeding still provide good heterosis value? And that was the first question. And the second question is for Ibu Fitri. Given the existing condition, can we say that crossbreeding in a mixed farming system is unsustainable? Okay, Professor Heather, could you please answer the question?
The answer to that question very much depends on the crops. So if you have an F1 Brahman British, Bos indicus bibophorus, and you cross it back to the same breed, then you are going to lose your heterosis. And so that's what we see in the stabilized composite breeds like Santa Gertrudis or Droughtmaster or Braford. If they are stabilized, they lose the benefit that they get for reproduction, for example. You know, they lose the heterosis. But if you then outcross to a third unrelated breed, like the tropically adapted taurine breeds, you know, the Criollo breeds or the Sanger breeds, so these are from Southern Africa or South America, then those breeds can be crossed and the heterosis retained. And the interesting thing is that at least with the Afrikaner-based crosses, the recombination loss does not seem to occur in tropically adapted composites, which is why in Northern Australia that three-way cross with Bos taurus, Bos indicus and the Sanger breeds or the Criollo breeds seem to retain the heterosis for multiple generations, but it usually disappears pretty quickly in two and subsequent crosses if it's just a two-breed cross.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. And the second question for Ibu Fitri, could you please answer that?
Yes, Mas Tristi. If we say about mixed farming system, I can say that the crossbreeding, if you crossbreed until, for instance, more than 85% of crossbreed, so it's not sustainable. I can say it's unsustainable because the resources of the farmers in the mixed farming system or in the smallholder farming system is limited. So they cannot afford the cost to maintain the good crossbred cattle. So I can say that the performance of crossbred cattle in the mixed farming system or in the smallholder farming system will decrease. If you still want to have a crossbred cattle, you have to stop until probably F2, and you have to sell the progeny into the final stock. So maybe it can be sustained, but if you just continue the crossbreeding, it's really dangerous, I think. Yeah.
I very agree with you, Bu Fitri. Okay, there are still a couple more questions, but we ran out of time already. We are already more than scheduled. So I think I will try to pass the question by email to the speakers. And I hope later the organizer can, I hope the speakers, both Ibu Fitri and Ibu Heather, would be willing to spare some time to answer them. Then I will ask the organizer to deliver them by emails to everybody in the audience today. Okay, so I think we came to the final stage of our scientific parts. I would like to give the summary of what we talk about today. Well, actually, I almost cannot give the summary because for me, everything is important because I came animal breeding background. So here are some points that I would like to highlight. So we have to admit that crossbreeding is the most feasible solution to improve the productivity of our local cattle. And then in order to get the optimum benefit of crossbreeding, we need both genetically superior exotic bulls, and also we need the fertile and robust local dams. What Ibu was pinpointing is that we need them and how the logistic to make it still available for crossbreeding for the next generations. Heterosis, which is the condition where the crossbred cattle perform better compared to one of the parent and or the parent's average. And the minimum value of heterosis can only be obtained when both parental breeds are genetically distant. And then breeding program has to be designed based on well-formulated breeding goals, collection of desirable traits, and the direction of the change. Then we can summarize the breeding goals. in the parameter called the aggregate genotypes. From Ibu Fitri, I have some points here to deliver to you that crossbreeding has long history in Indonesia, started from the Dutch colonization period. And then at present, crossbreeding in Indonesia is uncontrolled, which led to many unidentified crossbred. And then the main reason for crossbreeding program does not work is because there are gaps between the policymakers and the farm objective. Many dimensions need to be considered in designing a crossbreeding program, which include the economic or production, social, and environment. Hence, genetic impact assessment is needed to collect relevant information for formulating a proper breeding program, which is well understood and approved by the stakeholders. And last but not least, we believe that the best way to conserve and maintain our local breed is by wisely utilizing it. That's all for today, I think. Thank you very much, everybody, for the contribution. And thank you very much once again for the speakers. I return the time to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ibu Nuzul Widias, who led the presentation and discussion session in this scientific meeting. And we are grateful for Professor Heather Barrow and Ibu Dr. Trisatya Mastuti Widi for addressing the interesting topic. Ladies and gentlemen, finally we come to the end part of this meeting. On behalf of the committee, we would like to thank to the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture, Universitas Sebelas Maret, Bapak Dr. Eka Handayanta, for the remarks. We are grateful for the Chairman of ISPI, Bapak Insinyur Didi Purwanto, IPU, for the forward. And we would also like to convey our sincerest appreciation for our honorable speaker, who has shared some great knowledge related towards sustainable beef cattle crossbreeding in Indonesia. Hopefully, it can provide benefit for all of us. Thank you to the webinar participants who were so enthusiastic in listening and asking questions. And of course, thank you to the great organizers and committee who worked hard so that this afternoon's program went well and was filled with positive enthusiasm. And we thank to partner Ikatan Sarjana Peternakan Indonesia and the media partner of Trobos Livestock who helped make this webinar successful. Ladies and gentlemen, for the document purposes, we would like to take picture of all the participants, speaker, and committee members together. So please turn on your videos. Committee members, please take the picture for us. Probably there are some times to take. Keep smile. Okay, is it already done? Okay, thank you. Again, here are some announcements from the committee. For those who have not filled in the presents, please fill it in immediately. The material can be downloaded via the link written in the comment column. The certificate can be downloaded automatically through the webinar participants' email after each person has filled in their presents. Okay, now we enter the last event. Let us close this webinar by saying Alhamdulillah together. Alhamdulillah. As the master of ceremonies, I apologize if there are deficiencies and inconveniences in organizing this webinar. Thank you for your attention and see you at the next Webmaster series. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sampai ketemu.
Iya, thank you.
Terima kasih semuanya.
Sampai ketemu Pak Eka.
Terima kasih Prof. Eka.
Bu
Sampai
Fitri.
ketemu.
Thank you.
Iya, Pak Diki.
Thank you for all the speakers. Thank you for the moderator. Thank you for the Bu Lili.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Participant.
You're very welcome.
Very good webinar. Yeah.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Pak Didi Purwanto, Mbak Fitri.
Terima kasih Mbak Lili.
Bye. Ya, Pak Ika nanti kita dapatkan ya, Pak Ika. Still have a project for the future, Pak Ika.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Didi. Ini nanti sepertinya kita perlu kontak Bu Hider lagi ini ngobrolin tentang crossbreeding, kayaknya nyambung nih, Pak.
Ya, saya dapat kargonya.
Ya Pak, sip.
Ini semua ya,
Iya, sama-sama. Thank you Pak. Terima kasih sekali. Matur nuwun Bapak.
Monggo.
Link daftar hadirnya pundi nggih nun sewu.
Di chatting. Ada di room chat, Pak. Monggo.
Room chat nggih, matur nuwun, matur nuwun.
Di scroll up, monggo, di scroll up.
Ada di room chat ya Pak.
Nggih, matur nuwun, tak coba.
Coba roomnya di
Bu Nuzul, pertanyaan yang belum terjawab nanti di collect aja, kita jawab satu.
Terima kasih Bu Fitri.
Tadi ada yang tentang animal welfare, saya sudah mau jawab, tapi ternyata awalnya tidak.
Waktunya habis.
Ya.
Ya, nanti saya kirimkan, Bu.
Iya. Kalau audiensnya dari Indonesia,
itu masih pakai yang kemarin.
dapat pakai bahasa Indonesia. Pak Ika,
mana Pak Ika?
Halo, ya ada masih hadir.
Pak Ika dicari
Dicari di mana?
Selamat Pak Eka.
Oke, Pak. Alhamdulillah lancar.
Lancar Pak Eka.
Bagus. Materinya Bu Hider bagus sekali menurut saya.
Terus dia sedikit kecuali masih di sini.
Pak Didi masih enggak? Udah off.
Sepertinya sudah tidak ada Mbak Fitri.
Nggak tahu Pak. Tadi Pak Joni malah ada loh, Pak Joni Liano. Saya baru lihat tadi.
Tak klik link materi masih bisa sampai beberapa waktu ya, jam ini tak klik belum bisa Bapak.
Kapan materi? Kalau materi tidak ada batasan. Ada batasan. Materi tidak ada bahasan, monggo Pak.
Assalamualaikum Pak Topo, matur nuwun, pripun? Kula diajari ben entuk sertifikat. Halo, nggih, sampun sap. Nggih, matur nuwun, sampun.
Halo Ibu Meti Sompi. Kita pernah bertemu di conference. Saya Lili.
Ganti. Gitu.
Matur nuwun, terima kasih sudah hadir.
Halo Bu Lili Kartikasari.
Z, Bapak Triagus.
Nun sewu Ibu, untuk sertifikatnya bagaimana Ibu ya?
Untuk sertifikat, kalau Bapak sudah mengisi link absen, nanti otomatis akan dikirim via email Bapak.
Lah ya, update itu gimana Bu?
Present di link di chat room tadi Bapak, di chat room.
Oh, di chat room.
Oke, di chat room ada link. Bapak silahkan ngisi presensi, nanti kita kirim sertifikatnya Pak. Sami-sami Bapak.
Di chat roomnya.
Monggo Pak Agus, ada di chat room Pak Agus, baru saya kirim Pak Agus.
Nggih, matur nuwun.
Nggih, matur nuwun Pak Agus.
Sami-sami Pak.
Salam untuk Bapak-bapak di Undip.
Nggih.
Bu Lilik, maaf. Presensinya di mana ya, Bu?
Presensinya di chat room, Ibu. Di chat room.
Oh, oke. Yang dapat cuma materi sama ini, belum dapat presensinya.
Oh, presensinya sudah ada di linknya lagi, Bu. Sampun dikirim, sudah dikirim barusan.
Ada lagi. Barusan, Bu. Ya.
Ada dikirim lagi, Bu. Barusan dikirim lagi juga. Coba dicek lagi ya, Bu ya. Di chat room, Bu. Tadi barusan dikirim sama Bapak Sigit di chat room, barangkali masih terlihat Ibu.
Saya kirim private juga.
Iya, ini mau dikirim private lagi sama Bapak Sigit. Semoga dapat.
Terima kasih ya, Bu Lili.
Sama-sama. Terima kasih. Dari Ambon, Bu, dari senang sekali bisa bertemu. Terima kasih sekali.
Terima kasih ya.
Sama-sama. Ya, terima kasih.
Kasih ya, saya sudah mengisi daftar hadir.
Sama-sama Ibu Meti Sompi, kapan-kapan kepanggil lagi.
Ya, sama-sama.
Rekaman ada.
Belum ada, Bu.
Belum
halo.
Ada, Bapak. Ya, halo Bapak.
Ya. Ini dari NTT, Bu.
Iya.
Belum ketemu. Ini
belum ketemu?
link daftar hadirnya baru materi dengan sertifikat aja.
Oh, iya. Sebentar Bapak.
Ibu, sertifikat itu nanti
Ibu.
kalau diisi, itu sudah daftar hadir, Bu. Jadi nanti sertifikat akan masuk ke email Ibu, terus kemudian data yang Ibu masukkan jadi daftar hadir di kami.
Pak Sigit.
Iya, Pak.
Mohon maaf, belum dapat link daftar hadir, Pak.
Sebentar, Pak, sebagus. Saya kirim lagi di chat room, ya.
Iya, baik.
Jadi link e-sertifikat itu, Pak.
Iya.
Iya, itu lagi, Pak. Jadi ada link materi dan link e-sertifikat baru saya kirim di chat room. Bagus.
Halo.
Sudah dikirim Pak Sigit, Pak. Di link sertifikat itu adalah link presensi sekaligus, Pak.
Oh, kalau begitu, Bu. Oke, sudah isi tadi, Bu.
Oh ya, sudah, Bapak.
Kalau sertifikat sudah, tapi presensinya belum.
Udah. Otomatis itu Bapak. Otomatis
saya
isi.
Ibu, Bu, perkenalan dari NTT.
Ya, terima kasih Bapak. Salam dari kami semua.
Ibu.
Oh, Ibu.
Untuk sertifikat silakan dicek di email masing-masing Bapak Ibu. Jadi
Oke, terima kasih Pak.
Ya.
Terima kasih Pak.
Baik,
ya.
makasih.
Saya kira saya Pak. Bapak. Ya, sekali lagi terima kasih pada Bapak Ibu semua yang sudah berpartisipasi ya. Terima kasih dari kami. Salam dari UNS Solo.
Salam juga dari Indonesia Timur, Bu.
Ya, terima kasih Bapak.
Silakan mampir ke Solo kalau corona sudah selesai.
Salam dari Lombok Barat. Makasih Bapak Ibu.
Ya, sama-sama. Ya, sama-sama Pak Amrin. Ya, terima kasih sekali.
Itu ya Meriam, ada Meriam?
Boleh? Ya.
Materi ini pendek.
Oh, Bu Lili terima.
Iya, gimana Ibu Firda ini yang menyampaikan? Gimana Bu Firda?
Jangan dimatiin, nanti tak downloadin.
Ada yang
apa kabar Bu Lili?
Iya.
Dari Padang, Firda telat masuknya.
Iya. Oh, nggak apa-apa Ibu. Yang penting masih
Iya,
dapat...
tadi kuliah pas jam mulai 10 tadi sampai jam 12.
Oh iya.
Sehat Bu Lili?
Iya.
Tapi materinya sudah diambil. Mohon maaf ya, sudah daftar terus nggak baru udah di akhir.
Nggak apa-apa, sudah mengisi link Presensi untuk sertifikat ya Bu ya?
Oke, terima kasih Pak Tri Agus, Ibu Dameria Tondang.
Bu Lili.
Ya kita live lagi. Ya, Med. Makasih ya Bu Lili.
Sama-sama Pak. Ya, Bapak.
Oke, sehat terus.
Ya,
sukses.
amin. Terima kasih Bu Firda. Ya, sama-sama. Gimana Bapak?
Mohon maaf nanti kalau di UNS ada kegiatan semacam ini, baik yang tetap maupun yang webinar, tolong kami diberi informasi ya Bu.
Ya, baik Bapak. Insya Allah nanti kami sampaikan informasinya kalau di UNS ada kegiatan lagi untuk Bapak Tri Agus Sartono. Terima kasih sekali Bapak atas partisipasinya. Ya.
Karena Pak Sigit itu teman baik saya.
Oh ya, ini Pak Sigit masih ini Pak. Udah mau pergi datang lagi.
Iya, matur sembah nuwun Bu Lili.
Iya, Pak Agus, matur suwun.
Sama-sama Pak.
Pak Agus nyuwun sewu.
Iya.
Iya, mohon maaf. Bapak nyuwun sewu.
Apa nggih?
Nggih. Masih nakal kayak dulu enggak kok, Pak. Enggak nakal.
Nakalnya beda cara Pak Agus beliau.
Asistennya Pak Agus juga ini.
Iya. Jadi sekali lagi kami ucapkan terima kasih kepada Bapak Ibu semua, juga Ibu Fitri yang sebagai pembicara masih ada di sini, Pak Ika dan semuanya yang tidak bisa kami sebutkan satu persatu. Sekali lagi kami ucapkan terima kasih. Barangkali kita akhiri untuk acara pada siang hari ini. Barangkali nanti Bu Fitri masih dengan Bu Nuzul barangkali, tapi kita udah selesai dulu untuk acara yang di sini ya Bu ya, Bapak Ibu. Terima kasih sekali sebelumnya. Saya tutup. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terus Mbak Nuwun sangat.
Sami-sami Mbak Agus.
Terima kasih Mbak Lili.
Terima kasih Mbak Fitri. Terima kasih banyak juga.
Terima kasih Pak Adi.
Matur nuwun.
Sami-sami.